From CPC, this is Biocast. Today's episode focuses on what's next in biopharma and cell and gene therapy processing, a reflection on how we got here and where we're going. To help us break it all down, we brought in a titan, a single-use and industry expert, Mr. Paul Priebe, president and principal consultant for Paul M. Priebe Consulting. And now, here's your host, Todd Andrews.
Well, hey, welcome to CPC's Biocast, our first one that we've done in Roseville in our actual facility right now. So hope you like all the setup that we have right behind us. My name is Todd Andrews. I'm the Global Director of Applications and Business Development for CPC, and I am joined by an industry SME as well as a good friend of mine, Mr. Paul Priebe, who is the president of Paul M. Priebe Consulting.
Yes, I am.
And how long have you been doing that now?
Just about 2 years, almost to the day.
So Paul has a long history. I've known Paul for about 15 years.
At least.
But your industry, you've been in here for about 25 years in this industry, right?
Something like 25. If I add it all up, it's well over 25, yeah.
Known each other for a long time. I'm excited to have you on here because I do view you as somebody who knows a lot. We've interacted a lot at industry events, and you're always a guy that's really good in front of a microphone. And every time I hear you talk, I tend to learn something new. So hopefully we can transfer that off to everybody who's watching.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, let's start with your history. So how did you get into the biopharma industry? Because your background was not biopharma. You did not go to school for this. You're a mechanical engineer,
I'm a
right?
mechanical engineer, but, engineers repurpose themselves into all different roles, as we know. Actually, my first job out of school was at Paul Corporation. I was working in manufacturing, entry-level mechanical engineering job, making filters. And so I sort of consider that as my first industry job. And then I moved up into a manufacturing engineering position. But then I left the industry for about 8 years. I worked in the food processing industry, doing engineering, eventually getting onto the commercial side. And in 2002, I joined Sartorius. So I spent nearly 18 years there.
Wow.
Started in filtration. Single use probably began soon after that in like 2003. And then we ended up merging or acquiring Stedim in 2007. And that's when I was made responsible to do the integration of Stedim into Sartorius for the North American team. And then I ran that business in North America for, 12 years or so. Of course, we grew it unbelievably during that time. And so that's really sort of where I cut my teeth in the current version or the most recent history, more than 20 years. And then I left Sartorius in 2019, and I joined a company called Cosina, and I started up the Cosina Bioprocess brand as a value-added distributor for end users and integrators for single-use components. So I sort of took all the know-how from the industry and brought it to Cosina, and then I've been on my own now for about 2 years.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So you got a crash course in single use in your early days of Sartorius.
Oh, yeah.
So what was that like the first time that somebody explained to you, we're going to make a drug product in a bag?
It was, I think I was still in filtration, and we sold gamma irradiable capsules, sterilizing grade filters. And it was the first time I ever understood the difference between, gamma irradiated and a sterile claim, and what it took to achieve a sterile claim, and what the responsibilities were of the supplier to qualify their products for sterilization. And we had a product line that was frequently irradiated that was only qualified to 25 kilogray. Well, of course, everything that's sterilized with VD Max 25 needs to be greater than 25 kilogray, and we had a limit of 25. So it's early, deep end of the pool, like, oh, wait, our products aren't really properly qualified for this this market segment. So, yeah, I think from there, it blew up. We actually fairly close to here in Minnesota, we were working with a company called TC Tech.
Yeah.
Of course, TC Tech was then acquired by what was then Hyclone, now part of Thermo Fisher. But that was my first foray, and I was responsible with a buddy of mine in Sartorius in Germany to integrate TC Tech products into the Sartorius portfolio. So that was the real beginning. That was '03. So it's been a while.
Yeah. It's a whole different world nowadays, right? I mean, I think back then, I think you're trying to convince people the idea of doing single use, much less nowadays what it's like now. I mean, like, what do you think were some of the biggest hurdles in the beginning to get this to where it's at?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. We used to haven't talked about this for more than 10 years, but we used to actually compete against stainless steel.
Yep.
And so arguing that single-use brought benefits and elucidating those benefits and walking customers down that path, doing the sort of the higher level marketing and messaging out to the industry about that stuff. Of course, nobody's really talking about that anymore because I consider single-use is pretty much the default choice for drug manufacturing today, and it's funny to reflect back, to what we used to talk about. Even single-use mixing, right? So in something like '04 at Interfex, we signed a deal with what was then LevTech. So TC Tech and LevTech had a relationship. TC Tech was the contract manufacturer for the bags for LevTech, a single-use mixer, and we were the first ones to launch a single-use mixer in the marketplace. And man, that was like pushing rope, when you're the first, you get some early adopters and everything else. And then until we really had some viable competition that validated the marketplace, it was a bit of a slow go. You only had your real early adopters to work with. But it was a lot of fun, learned a ton. And now I'm reflecting back because I just prepared a training presentation. And one of the things we talked about was how many single-use mixers there are in the marketplace today. And I'm astounded. I mean, the patents have run out. So essentially the most important patents that cover single-use mixing have all expired. And so
what is the number?
I'm sorry? How many?
Yeah.
Oh, it filled a slide. It's at least 8 viable options out there of single-use mixers.
And say in 2004, what do you say, maybe
one?
It wasn't
it was
viable.
just us, LevTech.
Yeah, and you're still probably learning as you go. If you launched
Absolutely.
that right now, as the way it was 20 years ago, and you entered the market the way it is now, it probably wasn't even ready now. Probably the 9th option.
Oh yeah, I mean as I said, we were learning on the fly, different formats of bags, and then it was interesting because when we merged with Stedim in '07, we had about 3-ish years of single-use mixing under our belts as Sartorius, and then we had to then take the bag manufacturing and integrate it into Stedim's operations, and that was an adventure all by itself because we mostly had round formats with LevTech, TC Tech bags, and then we went to cubicle formats, and it honestly, I have to admit, I didn't think it was going to work, and it works great. So now most of the mixers in the market today are a cubicle format. There's still round ones out there, and they have their function and their applications where they're better. But so yeah, that was a lot of learning. It was a lot of fun. It was at the right time in my career where I had the time and energy and just lots of stuff to dig into, and it was fun.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's kind of backed into this, right? You didn't go to college thinking someday you're going to be trying to tell people to have a completely single-use manufacturing platform.
In
that is
plastic
insane.
bags.
Yep.
Yeah,
bags
exactly.
and tubing, and it just, I think I told in the last podcast that the first time I ever heard it was I used to work at Millipore, and I was an engineer, and one of the sales guys came in and said, we're going to be selling these bags. I was like, typical sales marketing.
Yeah.
This pipe dream, this like idea out there, and then you look at it now to what you said, single use now is a standard manufacturing platform. If you're going to start a new facility, why would you even go stainless unless it's a giant blockbuster? But nowadays you're seeing less and less of that.
Well, I think and I'll have to. There's one guy who gave me this messaging. It's got to be well over 10 years ago. Guy named Morton Monk, who I worked closely with when we wrote PDA Technical Report
out
66.
In Europe, right? Morton was out in Europe. Yep, Denmark.
And he's with Fujifilm now.
Yep. Used to be AGC, right?
He was an AGC guy.
I remember Morton.
In any event, there's a slide that he shared with me, and I was looking for it as I was preparing for this training recently. And, of course, it's like 2 work computers ago, so I couldn't find it. Mm-hmm. But the key benefit, and this is why single use is a default solution in my mind today, is the difference in the time to build a facility. Mm-hmm. So there's plenty of stories out there, and 12 months is sort of the record, right, to build a facility that relies heavily on single-use technology. And everyone sort of throws their thumb in the air and says it's more like 5 years for a facility that uses multi-use technology. And the difference, the 4-year difference between that time allows for the clinical phases to progress.
Yep.
And it increases the odds. Even, I think, an 18-month delay in a decision increase the odds of being right by something like 4 to 6 times. Mm-hmm. So if you take all 4 years of that differential, the capital risk reduction, you look at, the most recent example is Biogen's Solotherm facility, right? $1.5 billion facility, and their first, they had to build it 5 years before the projected approval date for their Alzheimer's drug. Well, then their first round, it wasn't approved. And then there was a controversial approval methodology by the FDA. And then, the uptake apparently hasn't been what they originally planned. So they built this massive facility, exposed themselves to a bunch of capital risk. And any CFO, CEO, if he can avoid that capital risk exposure, they're gonna. So I think they were planning on, blockbuster status and couldn't make what they needed in a reasonable single-use facility. So I haven't done a lot of research about it, but it is one of those stories that's in the trade publications. So I think it's a present example of why, if you can go single-use, you do go single-use.
Absolutely. Think of it, 5 year, you're guessing.
Yeah.
What are the odds that you're right? 5 years out versus 1 year out.
Yeah.
I
can't even plan, next weekend. And
no. And then probably the people who justify it probably don't work there at 5 years later. So,
well, yeah, that's
so cool. If you could travel in time, so think of like the way it is now versus 20 years ago. Like, if you were to go back to yourself 20 years ago and go, hey, here's what single use is really like now, like, or what are the biggest trends that you've seen different, not just technology, but even just maybe the adoption of it, the way people have incorporated or standardization, whatever.
It's kind of interesting. So there's a couple of big influences, I think, on today's implementation of single use and the challenges for users of single-use technologies and suppliers. The first thing is, 20 years ago, if you only had solutions for monoclonal antibodies, recombinant proteins, large-scale production, you're pretty safe. And of course, monoclonals still dominate the market. But the future is where suppliers need to focus, right? Yep. You've got solutions that were invented, 10, 15, 20 years ago that are implemented into monoclonals, and that's where your core business is, and it's repeating because those drugs are manufactured every day. But the innovation, the clinical pipelines are filled with dozens of different modalities, right? So most popularly, people will say cell and gene, right? Yep. Well, even that, as I was talking to one of your colleagues before we sat down, it's like, and I don't like lumping cell and gene together.
It should be cell therapy and gene therapy.
Exactly. And mostly because guys like us think about the world from the process end, not from regulating the product end.
Right.
And I think when you think about it from let's say an FDA perspective, yes, cell and gene go together because from a regulatory standpoint, that kind of makes sense as a drug product. From a process perspective, of course, we've got a huge variety of different processes. And it's not just cell therapies and gene therapies. It's also bites and mites and bispecifics and mRNA. And, there's a huge variety of challenges, technical process challenges that need to be, novel solutions have to be developed and collaborate with the customers and get them in place. And so I think that's the dynamic today that probably is the most fun part. It's harder because, listen, everybody can draw a 3-column, 1 UFDF step monoclonal process, right?
I'm not sure
it's
I
easy.
can, but everybody else can.
I'll teach you later. But now there's 25 or 30 nuanced processes that have different needs and different requirements. And having enough expertise to deliver novel, interesting, creative solutions to those is challenging, I think, for the supply base. I think it makes it fun. It makes it interesting that, a lot of innovation will come from smaller companies still. These startups that know this one little niche and will solve it, they'll eventually get bought up into one of the other suppliers, probably. But I think that's what keeps it fun to work in the supply base.
That'd be awesome. What do you think will be completely different 20 years from now? Like if you look at the single-use world and all the different modalities, or even just the classic biopharma process, what do you think will be different 20 years from now when we're hopefully on a beach?
Yeah. It's sort of thematic for me. And if you get me started on this topic long enough, I'll get to this topic, right? Eventually, I think that 30 years down the road of single-use technologies being used in GMP applications, it's still too hard. I think the level of expertise required at the interface between supplier and end user to put it in place well, be GMP compliant, robust, good supply chain control, all of that stuff, it's still harder than it should be. And so, pretty quickly we're going to get to, okay, well, how do you make it easier? Yeah, the answer is generally standardization. But what does standardization really mean? I'm very careful not to talk about technology standardization. I don't think we're ready for that. I had an interesting conversation with one of your colleagues last night about, on the other side of your business, on the core side, and how, or on thermal, where they work in standards writing organizations for cooling systems for large data centers.
Yep.
And it's a very interesting case study, and I'd like to learn more from other industries about how good standardization looks, because I feel like I've been participating in standards writing for at least 20 years in ASTM, in ASME. Those are the primary places. And, it's a hard process, and you've always got to be careful not to limit innovation by trying to standardize technology. But we've got so much to do to build a good foundation of qualification tests. So when somebody says it does this, you can trust that everyone who says that statement. I think extractables came a long way since the beginning. I mean, I think I gave a little history lesson in the training recently. Something like 1996, extractables data were published for the first time, actually by Sartorius, in a PDA journal paper. And then, here we are 30 years later, nearly, and USP 665 will go live almost 30 years to the day from that first Sartorius paper, right?
Isn't that crazy?
And 665, of course, is the first USP chapter written for single-use systems or manufacturing systems. Generally, they've dealt with drug product-related stuff. This is now drug substance-related stuff. And it's an extractables protocol that essentially can get to declaring an item chemically suitable for its intended use. And so that standardization took a long time. I mean, a good 30 years, right? I hope that the rest of the key topics don't take that long.
No. I think a lot of it, too, if you think of it, USP 665 seems so obvious now, right? It seems like it's compared to the way it was a wild, wild west of extractables. Nobody really quite knew what they wanted. Everybody a different way. Then somebody tried to create a good guideline that may have asked for too much, may have had the pendulum go too far. And then this is something that, at least for me, it seems like the first time you could hand somebody something going, look, if you're creating a new technology for this industry, if you follow this, you're good.
Yeah, I have the benefit of hindsight and changing of my roles through the battles over extractables. Certainly when I was with a major supplier who had really done some innovative work on extractables, having sort of this fed back to us was objectionable. Right?
Yeah.
So my emotional reaction to the 2012 ISBE paper that came out that sort of put this idea on the table. Jim Vogel, common friend of ours, Ekta Mahajan.
Future guest. He'll be a future guest here.
Oh, excellent. So anyway, we were definitely on the other side of the fence. Or me personally, I said, this is BS. They're telling us what to do. It's way more work. We've got valuable data already. You're going to make us throw away hundreds of, and it's not cheap, right?
No.
We're talking about hundreds of thousands
Probably
of dollars. We had legacy data. It was well rationalized. It brought value. Over time, I've evolved my stance on this, and I would agree with you. I mean, if I can argue, or if I argue that it's still too hard to do these things, the level of expertise required on the end user side to digest extractables packages according to, the wild, wild west, it was just too hard. Is 665 or BPOG's extractables protocol the right answer? I don't really care anymore.
Yeah, that's probably
maybe that's not the right way to say it, but an answer is better than no answer.
Yeah.
And I think, so that's why I've sort of really softened my stance on that and have the benefit of hindsight over, it's now almost 15 years since that paper came out.
Yeah, it's funny. Not to get too much on extractables, but it is funny, those battles are probably 10-ish years ago, right?
I mean, the BPOG protocol was published first in 2014.
Okay, so it is about 10 years ago. All right.
So now 665 is going live in 2026, in May of next year. There you go.
That's amazing.
A lot of time.
It's amazing. So we talked about some industry groups. You mentioned ASME and ASTM. Those aren't the only industry groups you've been involved with quite a bit, right?
No, and I think, I was I wasn't a founding member, but I was pretty early on. I think I went to one of the earliest BPSA meetings in Tampa, Florida, before, I don't even remember the year, but it was before we merged with Stedim, for sure.
Wow.
So it was around 2005, I think. And of course, Rick Sullivan from Hyclone, now Thermo Fisher, had founded it maybe a year or so earlier. And it's a trade organization primarily addressing issues common to single-use suppliers and end users. I spent I'm trying to remember, I think I did about 12 years on the board of directors when I was working at Sartorius, so it's a company membership, as you know. So I was Sartorius's representative on BPSA, member of the board. And now I'm a member of the Scientific Advisory Council, and also a member at large, associate member as an independent consultant. They have a special category for guys like me. So
Yeah. Well, don't we all?
and I know you're, of course, the secretary.
Yep, I am. I'm on the executive board, and
board.
I kind of got surprised by that. Just you always BPSA. I'd love to get more into BPSA with you because I think it's got such a great history. But it's been interesting that I've been involved with it for a while, long time, just a kind of casual contributor, and then when they start to bring you on the board, it feels like you carry a little bit more weight. And
Yeah, for
do
sure.
you have that imposter syndrome, right? Do I have the expertise to really help? And then you get the executive level, are you making the right strategic decisions? But the benefit, at least for me, we'll go back to you. I'm surrounded by a lot of really good members, and so it's been, as you first get on the executive board, it helps that I work with John Boehm, who was a former chairman,
Of course, John's a
current
great
chairman,
guy.
Mark
Yep.
Petrich. You got Todd Kapp, Kirsten Stralendorf, a lot of really good people. So what's easy for me, I think, as a board member at executive board, is I'm walking into an organization that's really built itself up very well over the years.
Yeah, we struggled for years. I mean,
So that's what I'd love to hear.
Yeah.
As you're in the early days, why? I mean, there's a specific purpose to why BPSA was created, and why was that? And then, how did you and the people around you help move the organization and the industry around it? Because I think BPSA definitely had an impact in the industry.
So, we sat through, of course, we were both at the summit this summer, the BPSA anniversary summit, and heard some of these stories. And really, I have to, I'm a little bit, I don't want to be the imposter here and say that I was part of the founding vision of BPSA. For sure, we joined BPSA because we were afraid that the other suppliers were going to take the industry in a direction that and there's a lot of that in these alphabet soup organizations is you kind of have to be there in case your competitor decides to take it a different direction.
At a minimum, you're in there for a defensive purpose. Even the extractables discussion, you want to make sure the industry doesn't define something for your company that's difficult.
Right. It's a little bit of an ugly truth, but I think we all sort of accept it. But then, as the organization has matured, I think there's a much more enlightened version where the participants truly do understand that solving common problems together is really the right answer. I think probably the best example, and I have to give a former colleague of mine, Samuel Doré, and James Hathcock from Sativa, former Paul guy, credit for the X-ray discussion. And I think I hold it up as the best example of the way BPSA should work and contribute to the industry. I think, I work together with James Hathcock, Monica Cardona, Jim Vogel on the biocompatibility issue recently. And so the BPSA, through the Scientific Advisory Board, has written a position statement. We presented on it at the summit. And I think that is another X-ray was kind of a really big deal. People didn't know how to digest it. This is no less important, but a little bit easier to digest, and it's because of the changes to USP's monographs 87, 88, and USP Class 6 plastics. And we've relied upon these standards kind of forever in our industry. Of course, they're all changing, and I have to give credit to James Hathcock. He did a fair amount of the heavy lifting, and most of the heavy lifting on bringing the other three of us up to speed. Jim Vogel ran a whole bunch of ballots through ASME BPE to make sure the BPE standard was updated relative to the USP monograph changes. And then I sort of grabbed all four of us, and I don't want to leave Monica out. She's been sort of a liaison to Bioforum's efforts on biocompatibility. So we all sort of rallied together and said, this is something the BPSA needs to make a statement on. And so I took it to the Scientific Advisory Council. We drafted something, we balloted it, and so now that's available for download. And the point being is we really want to give good guidance. We don't want to, we have to be careful. We're not a standards writing body, but I still think position statements from a trade organization are appropriate. And so what we've essentially said is, so Class 6 is going away, and so we really shouldn't reference it anymore after roughly the end of this year. It goes away for sure at the end of 2026. But also, continuing in vivo studies when they don't really bring a lot of value. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. There's the FDA is asking people to reconsider in animal testing to reduce the number of animals sacrificed for no value. So the BPSA's position statement really focuses on combining or leveraging 87, which is in vitro cytotoxicity, sticking with that. There's two new versions of 87, which would be sensitization and genotoxicity. Those are available if they're rationalized and make sense as a supplier to use them, but stick with in vitro cytotoxicity. And of course, 665 brings the additional information about the toxicology of the extractables from. So the combination of those two is sort of the position that BPSA is supporting. We're additionally not supportive of transitioning to the use of pharmaceutical grade plastics. So that's written for container closure. Now that we have 665 written for bulk drug substance manufacturing materials, we've got that on our side, and we really don't want to again jump on the bandwagon for a standard that we're out of scope and create a massive bunch of work in the industry that doesn't bring a lot of value by trying to transition to pharmaceutical grade plastics. So that's I don't hold those up. There's probably some other examples. I think the work on particulates is pretty strong from BPSA. There's a ton of work to be done there still. A lot of work being done in ASTM there. But those two pieces of work, the biocompatibility and X-ray, I think are really great examples of how a trade organization, and an example of the maturation. 20 years ago, when we were at BPSA, it was everyone was just feeling their way around, like being in the same room with your competitors. Well, how do we do this? And of course, we have antitrust guidelines, and it's a safe harbor organization, so we're allowed to sit with our competitors as long as we don't touch on any of the antitrust stuff.
The analogy I heard, especially in the early days, I think you described it very well, is they said instead of getting all these competitors together and fighting over the slice of the pie, make the pie bigger. And how do you get everybody the same obstacles, right? In the early days, incorporating single use, the reliability, how do we test it? How do we know what's right? Whereas now, as we're much more mature, we're doing things like, hey, remember the old days you had to do 87, 88? We're now coming back. We're going to have a guidance on that, maybe on PFAS, on even updating. We recently updated the quality test matrices, right? And the first time
and they're going to be revised again this year because of 87, 88 and 665 and some other stuff. So yes.
And the discussions that are done, even that don't make it into publication, like I always viewed BPSA as, and I'm biased. I've done a lot of them, but I think there's a strong talent that's a part of BPSA, and they do give great guidance. And what ends up happening a lot of times is a lot of the people that are tied to BPSA, like yourself, is a great example. You then go into ASME and you go to ASTM or you go to BPOG.
The Venn diagram is there's a lot of overlap in the alphabet soup. We all, and it to some people's mind, the alphabet soup are competitors. And in fact, if you break down by their work product and by what they bring to the party, and whether they're a ANSI accredited standards writing body or a stimulus body or whatever, you can tease it out and realize that they're really collaborative or synergistic. For instance, the BPE prefers to reference an ASTM standard
Yep.
if a good one exists that's relevant for that. They don't want to develop test methods within the BPE. They want to write a specification.
They want to point to something.
So it's, if you're careful about the nuance of what each of these bodies does, what their work products are, and how it all fits together, you realize they're not competitive at all.
No. And if a perfect world exists, you have all the guidance coming from an organization like BPSA, all the intelligence that then falls down into like a BPE or ASTM
Right.
to go, hey guys, because I think even in the BPE, they will point to an ASTM standard ideally, but then I think a lot of the talent that comes from a BPSA is helping ASME going, hey, here's how we really do things, or here's how the industry is, or here's the way people are already kind of doing that. If you're going to put that in a standard, let's make it reflective of what people are already doing, and making sure like the intelligence is coming from an organization like BPSA or BPOG.
Yeah, I think it kind of boils down to, and you had it upside. You and I look at it maybe differently. I say boil up, right? Because on the top are your regulators. That's the law.
True, of course.
And then you have the compendial organizations, USP, EP, JP, et cetera, and those are referenced by law. Mm-hmm. Then you have consensus standard writing bodies, and at least within E55 of ASTM and ISO expert groups, usually there will be a regulator sitting in. So within E55, there's EMA and FDA representation. That means that if it's a standard that went through a consensus process, it's ANSI accredited, and you reference it, the FDA respects that. That you don't have to talk about the rationale. If the way you use that test is in scope, you don't have to defend it. It's already pre-defended, let's say. Then below that, you got guidance, let's say best practice guides and guidance docs from people like PDA, ISPE. And then below that is where you get to we'll call them stimulus bodies, right? Yep. People who say, they write the problem statement. This is a problem. Here's potential solutions. Absent of anything else, at least you're not alone, right? So if you're using the practices that are supported by BPSA, at least you're not like the only guy like running up a hill with a flag, getting a spear in the chest. You've got some support from the industry behind. It's not nearly as strong as a consensus standard, but it's better than nothing.
Absolutely.
And to your point, though, eventually that can translate to a developed consensus standard, right?
Yep.
That's the point.
That's where I'm hoping to go. Yeah, that's where I hope to go. I think there's so many great discussions that we have in some of those groups that you go, this is great. We all kind of agree on this. Now, where does it go? You know what I mean? That's where I hope to see that evolution of the industry groups go, which they're all on the right path. I think where I see, it's kind of interesting what you think of this, where I see a gap in the industry groups right now is I think we have a lot of talent that we've worked with. You and I, you've named James Hathcock, I named John Bain, Mark Petrich, Jerry Martin, all these people that we've been around. And there's an element of generation to it, right? We have these founding forefathers, people who...
A little bit of gray hair.
Yeah. So then now is the bench strength being built up. Do we have that next wave? Because our industry has grown a lot. There's so much intelligent younger people in our customer base that you go, are they getting into these groups, or are they getting into a big company where they got to do their job? A lot of us were hungry, wanted to take on more. Do you see a gap in the next wave of talent in these industry groups?
I'm encouraged when I'm sitting in these rooms to see people that are earlier in their career getting involved. And I always try and take the chance to, and maybe it's a little too, I'm too full of myself to call it a mentorship, but at least give some advice about how to give some context, encourage them, some coaching or whatever, whether welcome or not, But, I think the thing I always say is that I wouldn't be where I am today in my career and my career development at Sartorius and then on to Cosina and now operating as an independent. I wouldn't be here if I hadn't spent the time in volunteer organizations.
Absolutely.
And I have to thank one of my early mentors in my career, Mike Yornitz at Sartorius. He hired me there. I worked for him for years. He put his boot squarely in the small of my back and pushed me into it. and boy, imposter syndrome. I'm a mechanical engineer from the food industry at that time, right? And he's like, get out there, kid, and just learn.
Yep.
And he's got a great expression. He's like, he's a big fan of continuous improvement and learning, and he says, you never stop learning. When you die, you learn how to die. And, it's a little bit in your face, but, some of his mentors literally worked until, they couldn't work anymore, constantly learning and publishing papers and really contributing. And it's an inspiration. So what I try and do is share that inspiration with folks, both managers of young people, I shouldn't say young, earlier career folks, and the folks themselves, to try and encourage them to don't be afraid.
Yep.
People are generally supportive. Be respectful, learn, hook yourself up to the fire hose and build yourself up, help your company, help your customers, all that stuff. So it's there's a rich environment because we got a lot, as I said, it's taken 30 years to get the extractables to where it's at. And we still have particulates, integrity, compatibility.
Yeah. Something else about our industry, like, know your take on it. One of the things I think we have a luxury in being in this market, in this industry overall, there's a lot of good people in this industry.
Absolutely.
I whether it's intentional or unintentional, there's a lot of altruism, I think, in this industry.
Yeah, I think the way you position it is right. It's a luxury, right? We're fortunate. I was joking with somebody who's like, sometimes it's hard to remember that the reason we all do this is for patients, right? It's, you do your thing and that connection is easy to lose. But then, we talked a little bit about cell therapy. I mean, I think that's where the inspiration can really come because it's quite visceral. If you've ever been to, let's say, Facilitate or ISCT or maybe ASGCT show, when the Emily Whitehead Foundation is there, the story is just, it's so inspiring, right? A young woman who was headed to hospice at 12 years old or 13, something like that. I don't have the details that well remembered. But she's walking around the trade show 20 years later, cured of the cancer that she had because of cell therapy.
And how many doses did she have?
One.
Isn't that amazing?
Amazing.
One. It's not a battalion of chemotherapy. It's one dose. It's like, I described it to somebody outside of our industry. It's like almost like science fiction, like where this could go.
Yeah. And again, mechanical engineer, I sort of learned all this, as I went, but still with the limitations of not really having the really solid background in biology, biochemistry, all that stuff. But still, I think, I've to hear that what the new therapies being developed today some of them are intended to be curative. Single dose cures for diseases that may have killed people. I mean, that's something we only dreamed of 20 years ago, I think. Well, I'm maybe mixing up my time frames, but I just find it very inspiring, and it's exciting to be part of it, and a luxury to be part of a community. We do get good people in this industry. It's motivating. It's it's growing, so we tend to have that luxury as well. Yep. Even dumb guys like us can grow business in this space.
Yep.
And so it's been a good ride, and I look forward to more years of it.
Awesome. Well, yeah. So right now you're consulting on your own, and maybe tell the listeners how they can get in touch with you if they want to bring you on board to help them out with their processes or their best practices.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I can always be found on LinkedIn. That's the easiest way to find me, Paul Priebe. And yeah, I work with both suppliers to try and help their commercialization efforts with new product development and things like that. But I also help users of single-use technologies with troubleshooting, implementation strategies, and things of that nature. And it's been a lot of fun. I've had the privilege to work with some really great clients over the past 2 years. And every time I say this, I knock on wood or hope I'm not jinxing myself, but I've been quite fortunate that, in 2 years, I've been busy the entire time. And I've really worked with a lot of great clients and enjoyed every moment of it. So I couldn't have designed my career to end up here, but here I am.
And it's working out well.
Better be lucky than smart.
Well, we've seen it firsthand. We just came in yesterday to train several of our design engineers.
I appreciate that.
Came in and gave a great update on the market, how we make our drugs, and then how the technologies fit into it. So,
well, I really of course, we've been friends for years, but I have deep respect for CPC as a supplier. I think you guys, you just approach things in a way. You've got a culture that you can tell from the outside that just celebrates, diligence and success, and just there doesn't seem to be a lot of noise in the way you do things. And so it's a privilege to be able to help your product development teams and your test folks and all the people who are responsible for bringing your products through the development pipeline to understand the market better. It was a great day. I really enjoyed it. I hope they did too. And,
I'm sure they did. And I couldn't recommend you any higher to anybody listening. So whether you're a drug manufacturer or supplier, give Paul a call. And wealth of knowledge, a true industry SME. So thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Todd.